Hello and welcome. Let us discuss the analysis and approach and some answers of the questions that UPSC asked this year in the mains paper for history. In the GS1, General Studies 1, we have 6 questions of history this year. I have all of them over here at one place. Let us see the questions first. Of these 6 questions, the question number 1 is about art and culture. It's about evaluate the nature of Bhakti literature and its contribution to Indian culture. So it's Bhakti literature and its contribution. This is about art and culture. The second question is about the socio-religious reform movements in the initial stages. So that is about modern India. Question number 3 is about the problems and the challenges faced while in the post-independence era during the course of integration of states into creating a union. So that question comes from the post-independence. Then these are the 3 questions that are for 10 markers. We also have 3 questions of 15 markers, of which the first one is about the role played by moderates and creating a wider base for the later freedom movement. That is again a modern India question. Then we have a expected question on Mahatma Gandhi, that is his constructive program, again a modern question. And finally we have one question from world history, the fate of the liberal democracies that emerged in the interwar period in 1920s and 30s. So we have world question, world history. So if you see the distribution of topics of the 6 questions, 3 are from modern, 1 from culture, 1 from post-independence and 1 from world. However, this is not a static distribution, it keeps changing every year. If you go in the previous year question paper, of the 6, 4 questions came from art and culture and 2 from modern India, none from post-independence and none from world. For last 4 or 5 years, they have not asked the direct question on post-independence India at all. A few years ago, they asked 2-3 questions on world history in the same year, and then there is gap. There is 0 question on world history for continuous many years, and then the world started coming again. So this distribution keeps varying. Our inference is that there is no strict partition between the proportion of the importance of ancient medieval art and culture in one side, modern, post-independence and world. We have to do all the topics. That is one point. If you look at the specific topics that they have asked, first is Bhakti literature, second is socio-religious reform movements, third one is the integration process of Indian princely states, then we have the role of moderates, we have the constructive program of Mahatma Gandhi, and then the liberal democracies in the interwar year. All these topics are very typical mainstream topics. If you have done the preparation very decently, every question is answerable. There is no difficulty as far as the topic goes. The difficulty arises when you start writing the answers. If you are not able to decode the question correctly, if your understanding of essential concepts is little hazy, and if you have not done answer writing practice, you will struggle in getting good marks, but you will not struggle by and large in even identifying the topic. So at that level, there is level playing field. Let us move on to every question one by one. Question number 1 is on Bhakti literature. Evaluate the nature of Bhakti literature and its contribution to Indian culture. It's a 10 marker. Now the question is straightforward. If you are able to understand it is Bhakti literature that they are asking about, and not only about Bhakti movement. The difference, Bhakti literature is much older. It starts from Upanishadic era. Bhakti movement begins in the 7th and 8th century CE in South India, in Pallava era, in Tamil region, and then spreads northwards. So if you focus your entire answer only on Bhakti movement and not on Bhakti literature, then your scope of the answer gets reduced by half. That is one thing. Second thing, look at the questions that they have asked in the previous year, in the recent years. They have asked 4 questions on literature in last 8 years. So literature has always been an important topic, and they have covered various literature, like covered Sangam literature, Krishnadeva Raya, Chinese and Arab, Persian sources, and this year Bhakti literature. So you have to prepare Bhakti literature, or for that matter literature topic, very thoroughly, which is also mentioned explicitly in the syllabus of the main examination. And they have also asked a question on Bhakti and Sufi movement in the recent past over last few years. So Bhakti in itself and literature in itself, both of them are important topics. That is my second comment. The third comment is about the approach to the answer. They have asked about nature and also contribution. Now you can approach this question in couple of ways. You can connect nature to its contribution also, one-to-one correspondence, but that will become difficult. So a easier way on the spot would be to have the body in two parts. In the first half you talk about nature of Bhakti literature, in second half you talk about the contribution of Bhakti literature to the culture of India. Let us go through some of the points. I will not teach the points here, I will just walk you through them so that you would have an idea of what is it all about. First, the nature. Firstly, Bhakti is itself is very old thing. The very first mention of the word Bhakti found in Shvetashvetar Upanishad. So it is in the later Vedic era, from there the term Bhakti comes. However, Bhakti as a doctrine, as a full-blown philosophy, as Bhakti Marga, devotionalism, that begins quite later in post-Mauryan and Gupta era, in which we have different literatures. We have, for example, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Puranas, and also various Mahakavyas being composed in that era, Sanskrit Mahakavyas like Raghuvamsham, Kumara Sambhavam, etc., through which you come to know the Bhakti doctrine. Then, the nature is primarily philosophical, but it is not monolithic. Different types of philosophical point of views are ingrained in Bhakti literature, starting from Advait to Dvait. The entire spectrum is present. The way this literature presents the idea of Bhakti is primarily through Katha, the Katha format, storytelling, narrative format, through which it reaches common masses very easily. And it generates a kind of Bhakti rasa. Now when I say rasa, it is a typical aesthetic, emotional experience or mental state that one comes into when he consumes that bhava, Bhakti bhava. So Bhakti rasa, that emotional experience is very important, that is sought to be given through the Bhakti literature. Then you have the best example of that is Jayadeva's Gita Govinda from 12th century. He was a poet in Sanskrit from Odisha, and his Gita Govindam is full of Bhakti poetry, the best example. Then you have most of the Bhakti literature that we are presently aware of in our daily life comes from regional languages. Rather, the Bhakti literature and Indian regional languages develop parallelly with each other. So we have that point, and we have this Bhakti literature in the regional languages which is not completely original, yet not completely copy-paste. They are not translation, like Kamba Ramayana or Sarla Das in Odisha, they are not translating Ramayana and Mahabharata. Unka wo tarjuma hai. They are writing their own versions of the original story. So there is that part of nature also. Then we have the Bhakti movement aspect. Bhakti movement that began with Alvars and Diners in Tamil Nadu, ancient Tamil Nadu, in South India, it gradually moves northwards. It comes to, in the 10th century, 11th century, it comes to Karnataka, where we have Basava and his Vachanas, Akka Mahadevi and other people. Then it comes to Maharashtra, we have entire Warkari movement, goes to Gujarat, Odisha, and then in the medieval it comes to North India. In North India again we have Sagun and Nirgun Bhakti, and each of them have their own saints. In Sagun also we have two types, those who prefer Krishna and those who prefer Ram, and they have their own saints, own literature. This is the entire movement. And the most important aspect that is not visible here, that point is about Bhakti literature. Although we tend to call it literature in modern sense, if you go to these vernacular languages, it is not only literature. It is oral performance that matters. It is orature. That word is a new into dictionary. The word is orature. It is a living tradition. It's somewhere between literature and oral tradition, and it has led to the profusion and efflorescence of various performing arts as well. So this is the overall nature. If you come on the other side, the contribution of Bhakti literature, the first thing, what might happen that people tend to focus more on the social rebellion aspect, social reform aspect, and therefore neglect other contributions which are also equally significant. When we come to Bhakti movement, we'll talk about the social reform aspect, but apart from that, we have a lot of Bhakti literature which also has a lot of different ways of contributing to Indian culture. We should focus on that as well. So you have cultural coexistence, synthesis and integration. India has various sects, various paths, various cults. The first and the most important thing Bhakti has done is to show similarity between them, that the path may be different but ultimate objective is one. Then you have the attempt of synthesizing various Indian local cultures into one great tradition through this entire Bhakti tradition, like Vedic and non-Vedic tradition. Puranic tradition is nothing but that. We have making Indian values popular in acceptable way. If I start making values popular through Dharma Shastras, they are very esoteric and arcane and very boring texts, people won't read them. If I start making Indian values popular through philosophical texts like Viveka Chudamani of Shankaracharya, firstly people won't understand. If they don't understand, they are not allowed to read. They are not allowed to read. If they are allowed to read, even after that, you see, they are very not enjoyable texts. It is Bhakti Rasa through Katha format that makes the popular wide appeal of Bhakti literature, and that becomes a vehicle of carrying Indian values from place to place, home to home. You have development of regional languages. As I said, Bhakti literature and regional languages developed hand in glove. And that became because the Bhakti literature became widely popular. It created its own symbolism, it created its own vocabulary, it created its own types of poetic formats. If you go to Tukaram's poetry, it is Abhanga, Gyaneshwar, it is Ovi, Basavanna, it is Vachana. So we have different poetic forms emerging also. Then social reform movement. Here the main point that automatically comes to your mind when you see Bhakti movement, at that point you can mention here with a few examples. We have spiritual journey combined with subaltern religiosity, imbued with social protest. It's a typical line. You don't need to, you will not be able to write such a technical thing, but you can use some of words. So rejection of orthodoxy, trying to bring in egalitarian values, inclusion, community formation, all these things are there in social rebellious aspect. And then ultimately it gave birth to various performing arts. You take any dance, classical or folk, you take any drama, theatre, you take any musical format, all of them are imbued with Bhakti Rasa. So that performing arts is also an important impact, the contribution of Bhakti literature. So these are all the points. The way I would conclude this answer is by commenting on the nature and character, that it was not a monolithic movement, it was a polyphonic movement through thousands of years in different regions, different languages, different views. Yet it had immense contribution in creating culture of India. Now in 150 words, we cannot write all these things. What we have to do is to pick and choose some points, take one or two examples and move on very quickly. This is the most ambitious thing. It is not possible on ground. On ground, you will write half of this. But even half of this, you should try to do two things. Firstly, you should try to include as many dimensions as possible. And secondly, for every dimension that you use, you should justify it. You should give substantiation with the help of supporting fact and evidence. That's all is required. Let us go to next question. So question number 2. Socio-religious reform movement, it is from modern India. The question reads like this: trace the rise and growth of socio-religious reform movements with special reference to Young Bengal and Brahmo Samaj, 150 words. Now this question is interesting, not because it is very technical or difficult, but because its expanse is quite wide. We have 3 questions inside one question. You have to write on the rise and growth of social reform movement in the 19th century. And then we have to give special reference to both Young Bengal and Brahmo Samaj. In itself, these are 3 questions and you have to give answer to all these 3 questions in 150 words in a good presentable format. Now look at some questions that they have asked in the past, that socio-religious reform movement, Indian Renaissance in the 19th century are a very important topic anyway. Every now and then they keep asking questions. If you look at some of the older questions, not a recent one, they have directly asked like characterize the main features of Indian Renaissance, the first of the question. Second is you have to write about the Raja Rammohn Roy's stands foremost in the field of religious and social reform. So they have asked individual question on Raja Rammohn Roy in the past as well. And they also have asked a few questions about the movement in the second half of the 19th century. Again, in the second half of the 19th century. So sometimes they have talked about 1850 to 1900. But this question, for the first time, implicitly they have mentioned Young Bengal and Brahmo Samaj, that is the first half of the 1830s, 1820s, 1840s, that is the period that they are asking about. So it is the foundational phase of socio-religious reform movement, which in itself is the foundational phase of national movement. So in this question, what we can do is we should not dwell a lot on explaining the nature, character, rise and growth and trajectory of socio-religious reform movement. That is not expected, that is not possible. In the introduction itself, you mention in 2-3 lines the characteristics, the nature or the beginning of socio-religious reform movement, and in the main body you jump to Young Bengal and Brahmo Samaj. So let us see. You can introduce this question in multiple ways. For example, you can comment on the 19th century India social reform movement in general. You can comment on the ideas of socio-religious reform movement like humanism, rationalism, liberty, equality, fraternity, typical. Or else you can talk of society was based on religion. So for social reform, religious reform was necessary, and that was the chief characteristic of 19th century movement. So you can introduce the same question in multiple possible ways. In the body, you will directly come to Young Bengal and Brahmo Samaj. It will have 2 parts, Young Bengal, Brahmo Samaj. Even inside that, we should not focus a lot on factual things like name of the persons, name of the institutions, years, names of books. You can use 2 or 3 facts and move on. That is not the purpose. Purpose here, which is implicit, it is not explicit, implicit purpose is to bring out the dialectic between the 2, Young Bengal and Brahmo Samaj. Young Bengal, in which we have the leader of, in the name of Henry Vivian Derozio, what he has done, he has asked for the wholesale rejection of India's past, India's tradition as hidebound, and wholesale acceptance of the values of the West, of modern Western value represented in the Enlightenment era, rationalism and the values of French Revolution. So it is complete rejection of India's past and wholesale acceptance of European Enlightenment rationalism. That is the point. If you can posit it against the nature of Brahmo Samaj. Brahmo means, Brahmo word comes from his idea of Vedanta. It is unity. It is attempt to create unification of East and West, good and bad, old and new. So what Raja Rammohn Roy has done is neither reject Indian past completely nor accept the West uncritically. He uses reason to find out good in both and combine them and reject bad in both. And that is why the Raja Rammohn Roy's movement had a surer footing, relatively more acceptance than the movement started by Derozio. But even that acceptance was not enough in the immediate terms. Even in his own life, there is a lot of opposition to him. Even there is a rise, there is not enough growth. In the long run, he proved to be the father of modern India. So the difference in a nutshell is that for Young Bengal people, modernization meant westernization. For Raja Rammohn Roy, they are different things. We are going for modernization, but not westernization. If you can bring that viewpoint, the comparative dialectic between the two, your answer is perfect. If you don't do that, that is also fine. It would get some average marks. So that's what I have written over here. Okay. Let us move to next question. Question number 3, integration of princely states. That is a question from post-independence India after a long time. Assess the main administrative issues and socio-cultural problems in the integration process of Indian princely states. It's again a 10 marker. If you look at the questions from the past, you will come to know that they have asked this question multiple times in last 20-25 years. You go to 1981, 89, 97, 2003, same question in different format, different nature has been asked. It's not a new question at all, that you should know. So my inference, my takeaway is that when I do previous year question practice, I do not restrict myself only to 2013 onwards. I should go as far back as possible insofar as history questions are concerned. In history, questions never expire because they are already expired. So that is, many questions are, every single question apart from the last question, every single question is repeated this time. That is one thing. Second point about this question is that they have specifically asked for administrative and socio-cultural. So in the main body of the answer, we should be able to differentiate them. And the third point, which is an important point, is that when you read NCERT or in a textbook, what happens generally is we are engrossed, we are attracted towards the dramatic events of Junagadh, of Kashmir, of Hyderabad, and for us in our mind that is the process of unification and integration. That is not so. That is a major problem, but that is one of the problems. The integration process is a long drawn out process of many years, which has multiple stages. If you have that understanding, that is required over here. Your answer is not supposed to revolve around Junagadh, Kashmir, Hyderabad. That is the point. Let us see some points. Oh, let us look at the map first. So when I said it is a long drawn out process, when India became independent, this was the political map of India, where the pinkish orange color is the British India and the blue color is the princely states, and there are more than 550 princely states there. When all of them were integrated, or rather when all of them merged into India, they were unified and they were clubbed into various regional sections. This map of India was created with group A, group B and group C states. And then after that we have linguistic formation of states, which was not envisaged in the Indian constitution originally. That came afterwards, and then you have states based on linguistic boundaries, linguistic provinces. This entire process is the process of integration of states. But we will focus primarily on the first process from here to here and not from here to here. That is a different question, but we can talk about it very briefly. So how would I introduce this question, this answer? I can first of all talk about the very typical and very popular term back then, One India. In the speech, Sardar Patel always used to refer to One India, Ek Bharat. So the integration of princely states is one of the steps towards realizing One India. You can introduce by that phrase also, or else you can talk about the multi-level, multi-tier process of integration that involved initially signing on the instrument of accession, then the merger agreement. From merger agreement you have unification, from unification you have democratization of the states, and then from that you have centralization. All these steps together makes it integration. And what the question is asking about, the administrative and socio-cultural problem faced during this process from accession, merger, unification, democratization till centralization. If you have that understanding very well in your mind, answer becomes to the point and not vague, not beating around the bush. So what were the administrative issues? You start with the 550 plus princely states which have different government, different geography, different polity, different revenue systems. Even today we have those problems. We have a lot of diversity and no responsible government. That is the context from which we begin. Then British had signed different treaties with each of them. So the nature of paramountcy and the amount of power that these residual states contained varied from state to state. So that is another point. There is no uniformity. Then you have cabinet mission which explicitly denied any British help in unifying India. They said that after us the paramountcy lapses, that is all. We are not responsible anymore. So the onus came on Indians, not on the British. Some princes wanted to be independent after that, so they dragged the process till the very end. Even after 15th of August 1947, they did not sign. Not many of them, some of them. They joined India on their own terms and conditions. So negotiation with each of them was done differently. We have a very famous book by V.P. Menon on that. The policy of pressure and persuasion. So in persuasion, various kinds of incentives were given, like privy purses, making them Raja Pramukh of their own or some other state, so that they can carry their status. So all these things were done. And finally, the problems continued even after signing instrument of accession, till the time the states were reorganized. So these are administrative issues. We have some social, cultural issues also, which are chiefly in a very broad sense of three types. One is of religion. We have some states which have Hindu majority and the king is Muslim, like in Hyderabad, in Junagadh. We have some states which have exactly opposite of that. The population is Muslim, the king is Hindu, like Hari Singh in Kashmir. These things created their own problem of integration. That is one point. Second is caste or tribe issue, especially tribe issue in the Northeast. Northeast had its own isolated development over centuries, and even in British era, they purposefully kept isolated. So we faced a lot of problem in Nepha and other parts. When Manipur had elections, before India's first election, the king there said, now I am democratic, I have done everything, I want to remain independent. The famous statement by Patel, he said to his secretary or somebody, is there no brigadier in Shillong? So there is something more than persuasion is used at that time. We have the problem of languages. A huge state like Hyderabad had many important languages spoken by a substantial size of population. You have Marathi, you have Urdu, you have Telugu, you have Kannada, in some cases Tulu and also Konkani, etc. also, but these are 3-4 primary languages. So that was a problem. When the Praja Mandal movement had started in 1920s onwards, as opposed to the unity or union of princes, Praja Mandal movement, which aligned itself with the National Freedom Movement of Indian National Congress, they had already taken promise from the Congress that whenever we help you for unification, in future you will go for the linguistic state formation, which was formally accepted by Congress, but after partition picture changed and the national leader said we will not go for it. That created its own problem. The popular movement emerged in various parts of India for linguistic state formation. That is also a socio-cultural problem which is connected to administrative issue. And then in the conclusion, again you can have variety of conclusions. One is a comment on its nature. It was long drawn out gradual process still going on, etc. Other could be the united leadership to fight social economic challenges of India for the first time in thousands of years was welcomed by most Indians on a positive note. If you want to add the details of these issues, I have given a list over here, which you can, the PPT will be shared with you, that is not a problem. So in the unification, you have different kinds of unified states being formed. I have listed them some examples over here, like central provinces, Punjab, in central Himachal Pradesh, etc. How these states were created by clubbing which princely states. And then you have centralization, you have IAS, IPS created, you have united judiciary, we also have a 7th schedule in Indian constitution that goes for centralization also. So these are also the steps in the process towards integration on the administrative side. You can mention some of them as well, but mind well, it is only 150 words, so you can't go for all.
Greetings of the day. I'm S.K. Manocha and I'll be discussing a few questions of geography from paper 1 of main examination this year. Now let's go for the question number 1. Now the first question is about landslides in India. The question was, differentiate the causes of landslides in the Himalayan region and Western Ghats. Remember, as you know from your readings of geography, landslide is a mass movement. By mass movement we mean a movement which is driven primarily by gravity. Remember, though it is driven by gravity, these mass movements many times need a trigger. And the trigger may come in the form of heavy rains in the mountainous regions, or may come from some human activity like boring a tunnel for a railway track, or building a dam, or may come from a tremor, and so on and so forth. Now, what important point here is that in a mass movement, as I write here, surprise is what creates a danger. That is, it happens all of a sudden. There are less chances of forecasting in such a situation because this happens instantaneously. Remember, along the slopes of the mountains, you have a very delicate balance between the resisting force and the force of gravity. And the moment there is a little disturbance to that, then you have a mass movement which could be in a few seconds or even a few minutes catastrophic in dimension. Now, we are given here in the question the Himalayas and the Western Ghats for the sake of comparison in terms of the causes which lead to landslides in these two areas. Now, both these areas belong to very high vulnerability zone for landslides. Now, some causes in these two areas are common. For example, anthropogenic activities may be common, though their scales may vary. But if we were to distinguish as per the question's demand, then I would say Himalayas, as you all know, are tectonically young, are tectonically active. They have a youthful landscape, and because of this, they are prone to earthquakes. So any tremor in the Himalayas could become a reason for the landslide, because tremor may disturb that delicate balance between the gravity and resisting force. And in the case of Western Ghats, they are tectonically not active because that part of India is a shield. By shield we mean one of the original parts of the Pangaea, the landmass, that supercontinent of the past. So tectonically these areas are not active, but do have the idea, understanding that we may have sometimes some ancient faults even in the shield, and there may be some tremors in accordance with that. But mostly the tremor related landslide would be more a kind of case in the Himalayas. The second important point which can differentiate the two areas would be that in Himalayas, high up in the mountains, we have large number of glacial lakes, and because of any disturbance like heavy rains and other such things, there may be a glacial lake outburst, and that leads to a flood, and that particular flood or even the heavy rains out of a cloudburst can be a big reason for a tremor, for a disturbance, and you can have a mass movement called landslide out of that. Then you know, in Himalayas, you have folding as an important geological process. But along with that folding in Himalayas, we have many areas which have experienced faulting on large scale. And along the fault zones in the Himalayas, there is always a possibility of the collapse of a slope. And that would be another reason which is there in the case of Himalayas for landslides. And besides that, human activities like deforestation, dune cultivation in some parts of northeast, which is still prevalent there, which may lead to soil erosion, and the slopes may get destabilized because of that reason, and that may lead to landslides. In the case of Western Ghats, we have heavy rain during southwest monsoon season, so that becomes one very common reason for the landslides. Then large scale mining is another reason, and one important point which is more seen in the coastal areas would be that in the case of Western Ghats, we have steep slopes of the mountains, the cliffs, and those which are in the coastal areas, they might be having a lot of erosion by sea waves. Means the action of the water of the ocean may lead to more of erosion at the base of the steep slopes, the scarps which we call, and that base erosion may lead to the destabilization, and there may be an immediate collapse sometime of those slopes. So these are the kind of main differences we have for the landslides of Himalayas and the Western Ghats. Now, At the end, we can always write, we can conclude with a single statement that whenever we think of the measures to tackle these problems, the area-wise or area-specific measures will be always relevant. So I say, this all suggests area-specific mitigation measures which need to be coupled with positive actions from our side, like afforestation programs, or we should have some sort of arrangement for water not to flow and go into the rocks, and that may become a reason tomorrow for the landslides and all that. So we should have bunds for controlling the flow of the water, or we should go for afforestation programs. These kind of positive actions can be good for mitigation of such problems in both the areas.
The next question, despite India being one of the countries of Gondwana land, its mining industry contributes much less to its GDP in percentage. Discuss. This was, I guess, a 15-mark question. No, it was also a 10-mark question. Again, look at the keywords. One of the countries of Gondwana land, mining contributing less to its GDP. When the examiner is saying one of the countries of Gondwana land. Okay? So basically, examiner is telling you that there are other countries which were part of Gondwana land, that ancient landmass, and in those countries, the share of mining industry to the GDP is much more than what we have in India. Is basically telling you that there are a number of countries which are rich in mineral resources, like India, but those countries are able to develop their mining sector while we are not able to do so. Okay? So one meaning here, so when you will start the question, you will start the question by introducing and telling the examiner that yes, what examiner is saying, you also know that. You will say that share of mining in the total GDP of the country is less than 1.75%. If we compare it with the other countries which were part of Gondwana land, like Australia, or for example, other countries like South Africa, in those countries, the share is much higher. Like in South Africa, it is close to 7.5% of its GDP. In Australia, it is close to 6.9% of its GDP. But we also belong to the same land, but our share is much less. Okay, so you'll introduce the question by giving this kind of a data. Okay, so you'll tell the examiner that what you are telling me, I also know it. Then the question says, why is the share less? Again, this question was also on the expected lines because this year we had the coal crisis and certain amendments were made in the Mining Act for coal. Like for example, if यहाँ पर they have given the term Gondwana land, Indian coal is known as Gondwana coal. So it can be linked to coal as well. यहाँ पर why can be the share of mining less? Why is the mining sector not developed in India? Can I say one reason can be the environmental constraints? Yes, abhi kal parso hi we had a news item wherein the Supreme Court says now the iron ore mining will be banned from Chitradurg and Tumkur as well. In July, it was banned from Bellary. When government says CIL is not able to mine a lot of coal, CIL says that there are a number of blocks, but the government has not given the environmental permission. So clearance is not given from the Ministry of Environment and Forest. So that is why we are not able to mine. In the previous UPA government, we had go and no-go mining areas. So one aspect of the answer will be on environment. This will be the major aspect. Second can be on technique of mining. Like for example, you can mention that in coal, though we have the 4th largest reserves of coal in the world, but we are the 2nd largest importer. We are heavily dependent on the imports, and one reason is productivity is less. You can tell about the productivity of coal mining in the country, both of the underground mining as well as open cast mining, give a comparative analysis, and then can tell one reason can be the poor technique of mining. Like we generally go for the pillar and board method or pillar and room method, and better technique is long wall mining. Third reason can be related to investment. Though 100% FDI has been permitted in the mining sector, but there has been a very slow response. Not many companies are willing to invest. The companies that have invested, they have just burned their fingers, they've burned their hands. So there are so many clearances that you need to take before the mine can be started, before a block can be made operational. So why will the foreign companies invest? And when they will not invest, how will the capital come? Then the fourth dimension of this can be the development of manufacturing sector. We were mining iron ore in Western Ghats. We were damaging our environment, and then what we were doing? We were exporting this iron ore to the areas of China, Japan, South Korea. They were converting it into steel, and steel was dumped into our country. So until and unless the manufacturing sector starts in a big way, the share is not going to increase. Or if I look at, if you are able to mine, what will you do with this material? You will have to start the manufacturing sector in a big way. So the fourth dimension can be the share of manufacturing sector to the total GDP in the country. If the production of steel in India increases, then mining of ore is going to increase. If the per capita consumption of electricity increases, then more of coal may be mined. You can also include, because this is related to Gondwana land, one aspect can be coal. You can talk about the nationalization of coal mines. The productivity has been less. The captive miners were not allowed to sell their produce in the open market. Commercial mining was permitted very late in case of coal. So ये सब aspects you can discuss here. Okay? Then towards the end, you can conclude by saying that these many people are 55 million people are indirectly dependent on directly dependent on mining in India, where it provides employment to almost 11 lakh people. Okay? So this way you can conclude this question.
The second question says, what are the environmental implications of the reclamation of water bodies into urban land use? And as the question says, explain with the examples. Remember, the guideline which I have shared with you is that always try to write what is being asked, and the very first line of your answer should mean business. Remember, by reading a few lines in the very beginning of the answer, examiner should be clearly impressed that the student knows the answer, and he reads the body of the answer just to confirm how well you know the answer. So frame your answer in such a way that from the very first line, the examiner is engaged in knowing about the quality of the answer, and by the time you reach to the conclusion, impress the examiner with such a point that he gives you little extra after reading the conclusion. In the conclusion, summarize what you have written, and plus, if possible, add something extra which tells you or which tells the examiner that you know much more than what the examination question is itself asking as such. So give an overview in the conclusion and plus add some new dimension to the answer as such. Now, when we are talking about urbanization and the reclamation of the water bodies into our cities' land use, I am reminded here of one important statement by one famous urban geographer, Ramachandran. He had said once that the urbanization in India has been unplanned, haphazard, and unregulated. And this one single statement tells you a lot. And in this particular kind of statement, you can understand the reason that as we have gone for this unregulated, unplanned and haphazard kind of the urbanization in this country, we have been going for reclamation of more and more of water bodies for using this land for different uses. And this has become one reason today for number of serious implications vis-a-vis the environment. Now, if I was like, since we have to support it with the examples and the details, it is always good that you have some statistics to support the particular point of the examination questions. Now, I have written here that it has resulted in rampant encroachment of wetlands, the water bodies, and just to support that, I write here, India has lost about 50% of its lakes and wetlands to other land uses. The number of water bodies in Delhi have been, for example, reduced to 600 from original 800. And you all know the floodplains of Yamuna in Delhi are densely populated. That land has been encroached. And now, coming to the serious environmental implications of this, in the last 10 to 15 years or 20 years, we have seen that from Kashmir to south, deep south, we find that we have frequent cases of urban floods. Remember, wetlands of an area are water retention zones, that they absorb your water when there is a heavy rain. But since we have removed most of those wetlands, so our earth surface is not able to absorb the rainwater. And secondly, that we have laid different kind of surface layers for urban areas which are not able to soak water. It means your water is having a flow, and then that becomes a problem for the administration to manage if there is a heavy rain. So because of drainage channels getting blocked, and because of the wetlands not being there in a city like Chennai today or Bangalore or even in Delhi or Mumbai, and for the reason that drainage channels are blocked, the moment there is a heavy rain, we are ready for having a big disaster out of it. That is, you may have an urban flood on a large scale. And that is the reason that there have been floods of this kind of scale from Kashmir to Chennai in the last 10 to 15 years. And if you talk about the Chennai's airport also, that is having its kind of like we have, having many of its parts which are there over the floodplains in relation to a river. So that itself makes it more vulnerable for future. And second environmental implication is that you have decline in water table in a city because of reclamation of these water bodies. And there are shortages of water resource, and you hear about this in a city like Chennai on a large scale. Then you have contamination of these water bodies. Chennai has lost, as per one estimation, 33% of its wetlands just in one last decade as such. And many of these small tributaries and the water bodies have been lost, they have got extinct, or they have been reduced to more of the channels for the industrial effluents. They are converted into what is called nala. That is, you really have a lot of the waste of the industry is being drained into it. Then you have loss of biodiversity because of the wetlands and the water bodies being encroached in the urban areas. Remember, ecologically speaking, a wetland is a very productive ecosystem, and it is a home to like diversity of species of flora and fauna. And more importantly, these are those sites in your urban areas which are the transit points of migratory bird species which come from thousands of kilometers distances. And all these are not there if we have lost those wetlands in the city as such. So there is a clear loss of biodiversity because of the loss of the very habitat which can provide the food for these number of species. And when you go for reclamation of these water bodies for urban land uses, we have land subsidence in coastal areas as a result of it. And more importantly, if you have such areas being used for building apartments and other, say, commercial buildings, etc., you will find during an earthquake, there is a possibility of much more catastrophic results out of it, for the reason the soil of a wetland over which you have gone for building some infrastructure that may be under what is called soil liquefaction during an earthquake. It means you will find that seismic energy which is reaching that area may have much more disastrous results than otherwise as such. Kathmandu earthquake was such an example where you know that Kathmandu as a city is located in the past or ancient lake as such. So wherever you have the loose deposits which are related to a lake, lacustrine deposits as we call them, such areas which are reclaimed for urban land uses will always be more prone to the destructive effects during an earthquake, and this all comes under what we call as soil liquefaction. Now, mostly it is seen that these water bodies are grabbed by the builders and other such agencies at the time when it is a dry season, because at the time of dry season you do not have water in these bodies, and that is the best time for these agencies to use that area for other land uses. So the most important focus by the authorities for avoiding these kind of reclamation would be that you need to be very watchful in the dry season when these areas are being encroached upon on a large scale. And I will quote here at the end in my conclusion, Mark Pelling, the famous geographer and climate change expert, has beautifully written that urbanization affects disasters just as profoundly as disasters can affect urbanization. This really tells a lot about what is happening in our urban areas in India for the last, say, 2 or 3 decades. Now, let's come to the next question. The next question is about the global occurrences of volcanic eruptions in the year 2021 and their impact on regional environment. Now see, this is a very factual question, but do remember, as I said, questions in UPSC examination do not come from vacuum. If you have been reading your newspaper in the year 2021 and little before that, you would find that all these questions, or most of them, which are based on current affairs, they would have a mention in one or the other form in the national newspapers. So year 2021 was a newspaper for the reason of more volcanic activities. And if anyone has been reading the newspaper thoroughly, daily in a disciplined way, would have a notice of it. And remember, my guideline is that when you are reading your newspaper of the day, from the newspaper you must go to your subject matter. And from the newspaper you must go to the internet for collecting more of information on those areas which are there regularly, and that is what would make you have more questions. You will be able to predict the kind of questions UPSC may ask in this particular or in a given particular area as such. So, since in year 2021 we have been having such volcanic eruptions which have been more, say more intense in different parts of the world, and for that reason there was a question that it was an eventful year even in terms of volcanism than coronavirus and other such things. So there was a question on this particular point. Now, the question is what the global occurrences of volcanic eruptions. It means the student should know 2 or 3 good examples of the famous eruptions in this year. It means when you're going for your newspaper reading, you must keep making note of these on different cards. Remember, more such facts you collect, in one or the other form they will get used. So my guideline is, as you are going through the year's preparation, from the newspaper and the magazines of current affairs, whenever you get some factual information, please keep collecting them as per the subject specific details and keep them revising, and such kind of small handy details are really very, very useful for such a question. So one for this question's answer, you were supposed to know certain particular volcanic eruptions. And second, from your subject matter of geography, you know that during volcanic eruption, certain gases are ejected out along with the lava. So if you know all that, a mix of the two would give you a very good answer. Now, what I would suggest is that since it may be difficult for many of us to know every detail of a particular eruption of a particular year, so what we do is we can write in the initial part of the answer something in general which would pertain to all the examples I'm going to share at the end. And for particular examples, I may have some particular limited information. And remember, writing 150 words would not be a difficult task if you go from this approach. So what I have done is, I have given the definition of volcanism in the beginning. And second, I have mentioned that volcanism of the world is related to plate boundary interactions, and one, the volcanism which is there in the interiors of the plates, which is related to what is called as hotspot volcanism. So I write here, most of the Earth's volcanism is related to plate boundary interaction and hotspot activity in the Earth's mantle. Now, after this, we understand that a large quantity of gases are ejected out in most of the big eruptions of the world. Now, I may not have the say scope, the number of words are 150. I can't write for each particular example that what gases were ejected out and other details. One, I may not have all the information with me, and second, that you may not have the words also to write that much. So what we do is, we write in the very beginning what are the gases which are generally ejected during volcanic eruptions. Now, remember, in volcanic eruptions, water vapor is in majority in the gases which are being ejected. So I write, water vapor makes the bulk of the gas emitted, but other gases include carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and fluorine. And the hazard resulting from these gases would vary. Now I have given the example of sulfur dioxide, which may give you acid rain and which may lead to damages on the vegetation, and it might lead to corrosion of the surfaces and all that. And second, when these things are ejected out, the particulate matter which is there in the atmosphere, it may also lead to the kind of the amount of insulation which is to reach on the Earth's surface because of the interference on the way. So I write, high in the atmosphere, these same droplets may reflect incoming solar radiation, altering the global weather conditions also. And one very clear understanding is that volcanism has an important role in changing the landscape of an area. Remember, when there will be large quantity of lava being poured out, and plus with the lava you have other pyroclastic material, so it really makes a big change on the landscape of that area. Now, the question was clear for the reason that year 2021 was an active year for eruptions characterized by some unexpected, impressive and deadly eruptions. Now, to support or to give the examples here, I go for 3 examples. One was the case in Philippines, in Manila, about the crater with the name Taal. So this had its eruptions. Second example is La Palma, that was on the Spanish islands, the Canary Islands in the Atlantic Ocean. And perhaps it was the most famous eruption of 2021. And it led to a lot of lava flows and thin volcanic ash, though perhaps it is believed that there were no deaths in this region because of this huge eruption, which was perhaps one of the deadliest in terms of the destruction. It was really very intense one, but it led to a lot of property destruction, and there were a number of evacuations done in that area. People had to leave their houses, and all other such infrastructure got destroyed because of these volcanic eruptions. And the third important case was in Indonesia, in Mount Semeru in East Java, and it is a subduction zone. See, I'm telling the examiner also that I know about this area in terms of what kind of boundary interaction is there. So remember, this is value addition, that when you are giving the example, you are also telling what kind of interaction of plates leads to this particular volcanic eruption. So here the Indo-Australian plate is subducting under the Eurasian plate, And this blast caused by the collapse of a lava dome in Indonesia, Semeru, has killed 43 people, and it led to burning of villages which were around that particular area as such. Now, see, I have handled the questions requirement by giving the particular examples and the kind of changes it has given us in that regional environment. But at the end, I also tell the examiner that these volcanic eruptions they do have a positive role. In fact, if we see it geologically in the past, we find that scientists believe that most of the atmospheric composition today we have, that is all because of the initial volcanism of the earth. So in the initial time of the earth's history, there were a lot of volcanic eruptions, and in the lavas which were erupted, we had volatiles being ejected out of that lava, and those gases, volatiles, were captured by the earth by gravity, and because of this, our atmospheric composition got modified over a period of time, and finally we came to have the atmosphere which made the earth the living planet the way today we have, with great biodiversity as such. So I write, it is generally believed that most of the present atmospheric composition is a result of Earth's past volcanic eruptions, and through these eruptions nature releases the stresses built inside the earth, and it means the volcanic eruption is acting like a safety valve. So if I take a pause here, so what I'm suggesting is that in all the three questions, in these questions we have discussed, first we give a brief introduction, but you notice that in all these introductions, I'm talking about the very question which is there rather than having an indirect kind of introduction. For example, if I go back, just to give you the illustration here, that first I write about landslide as a mass movement. I write about the fact that gravity is the main reason, and the moment there is a disturbance to the delicate balance, there is a surprise event called landslide. And then I talk about the two areas which are there in the question. They are from high vulnerability zone as such. And then I talk about making my answer very clear in the body of the answer, and see, to reduce the number of words I'm using, instead of writing the paragraphs, instead of writing the full sentences, I write the points and I make a clear distinction between the two areas. Similarly, if you see about the environmental implications of the reclamation of the water bodies, I first tell you about the urbanization here in India, and the very first statement sums it up, that why do we have such kind of reclamation, why do we have such kind of problems in the urban areas, that what all we have done in the urban areas with which you have, that a heavy rain on one particular day can lead to a disaster. And this is summed up in 3 points, that our urbanization has been unplanned, haphazard, and it has been unregulated. And then I have given the examples for the encroachment of the water bodies. And then I come to give in the body the serious implications on the environment because of what all we have done in this urban growth in different areas of the country as such. Then in the same way, I went for giving an introduction to volcanism. I remember in this introduction also, I'm not talking about any general introduction about volcanism. I'm writing something what is required for the question's answer itself. So this is what I want to always tell my students, that do not go by the training we had in school, that write an indirect introduction for a question's answer. We have been told sometimes by a school teacher, Bhumika Bandhiye, that is, write something indirect and then come to the answer. No. Remember, neither we have the time in the examination hall in UPSC, nor do we have the words for such kind of a long, indirect kind of answers. So, and third, remember, you have no reason to irritate the examiner. Examiner wants to know whether you know the answer or not, and how good is the answer you know. So right from the very first sentence of the answer, you should mean business, and the very few initial lines of the answer should tell the examiner that you know the answer. And he goes to read it further to know how well you know the answer. Means examiners will be deciding by reading the body of the answer that what score should I give to this student in this answer. And write the conclusion in such a way, give an extra point there that gives you the reason for getting 5% more on what otherwise this score would have been. So, introduction, make the examiner clear that you know the answer. Introduction should be very direct. The very first line should give the answer. And second, in the body you go for an elaborate kind of an arrangement of points so that you have a comprehensive gist there for the answer. Remember, I'm using the word gist for the reason that you are writing these answers in either 150 words or 250 words. So you do not have the scope to write lengthy sentences and all that. So here is the opportunity for you to convince the examiner, impress the examiner by writing short points indicating the content in such a way that yes, you use less number of words, but the ideas conveyed are more. And this is what I have done in the body of the answer in all the three questions. Now we come to question number 4. Question number 4 says, why is India considered as a subcontinent? And he says, elaborate your answer. Though he's asking for the, elaborate your answer, but remember the words are 150 only. Now, you will find this is a very conventional kind of a point, that India being considered as a subcontinent. You will find this point is discussed in various NCERT books. So anyone who has been reading the books would know about these kind of things, that what all have to write. Remember, India is being considered as a subcontinent primarily for the reason that it has a very distinct physical identity on the world map. Now remember, as an Indian, when I see India on the world map, I really would always see it as a distinct identity. And that would be the same case for any person from any other country of the world, that when he or she looks at the country, the homeland, it would appear to be very distinct. But in the case of India, I would say this is perhaps really in an extreme way, that we have a very clear identity, clear kind of distinct locational identity given by nature to us. And not only we have a clear distinct identity on the world map, we have a large scale in terms of the area we have. Now, on the north of India, we have the Great Himalayas, and they're extending east-west for more than 2,400 kilometers. And then see that on the east as well as west, we have syntaxial bending in Himalayas. And this provides a box-like arrangement right on the north of India, which is separating India as a physical entity from the Central Asian region. And this particular location is there in the south, surrounded by the Indian Ocean. So we have one side the ocean, the other side the Great Himalayas, giving us a clear, distinct identity. And over and above which, because of this distinct identity, we have the monsoon, the best monsoon of the world, being restricted to the country alone in a big way. And these Himalayas save us from the cold winds of Central Asia. And monsoon, which is the most defining feature of India's climate. Remember, because of monsoon only, because of this Himalayan region only, we have India's climate being given the label of being a tropical monsoon type climate. Now, so in this question, first tell the examiner what exactly do I mean by subcontinent. I say the term subcontinent refers to a large distinguishable part of a continent. India is a huge peninsular extension of great landmass of Eurasia with a clearly distinguishable physical identity. Remember, Eurasia has extended its peninsula into the Indian Ocean, and that is what makes our country. So there is a clear great peninsular extension of the great landmass of Eurasia on the north, and India has, along this physical distinct identity, we have set of diversities on every count of human life. Means you talk about social diversity, economic diversities, you have physical diversities of all kinds, and that too on a continental scale, present in just one country alone. So it means we have the continental diversity in this country, but at the same time the beauty is that there is an undercurrent of unity in this diversity. So it means in all different ways we find, one, we are large in size in terms of area, we are large in terms of population size, and at the same time we have great diversities, and furthermore we have one identity also. Now, if you take monsoon again, you will find monsoon binds us in one rhythm throughout the country. Means India's art, culture, literature is influenced by monsoon in every part as such. Look at agriculture, look at anything of our society, monsoon is really binding us as one. Means this is just one example. There are other ways to understand that we have oneness. So in this question, first tell about the physical distinct identity India has. And second, with that particular physical distinct identity, we have great diversity. And again that we have oneness in this large area despite all this diversity. So I write here that physical distinct identity is understood as that on the north we have the girdle of the great Himalayan mountain isolating India securely from the rest of Eurasia, and on the south the peninsular shield means one of the most stable land masses of the world, one of the original plates of the world, the Pangaea as we call it, comprising one original slab of Pangaea, and in between were the vast flat expanses of the great northern plains. So India has the young fold mountains on one side, on the other side we have the original landmass of the Pangaea, and in between we have one of the largest flat plains of the world, and along with that we have diversities. Then India's climate is making us or giving us oneness. So for all this reason, it is aptly referred to as, the India is aptly referred to as a subcontinent. So basically you have to focus on the identity with the diversity and that oneness we have as the basis for this question's answer.
Hello students. So we will start our discussion with question number 9. Question number 9 and question number 10 are 10 markers, 150 words each. And how you have to, let us start discussing the question number 9 directly. The question number 9 says, examine the uniqueness of tribal knowledge system when compared with mainstream knowledge and cultural system. So why this question has been asked? Because tribal knowledge system is very unique. So in introduction we can write here that tribal knowledge system is very unique because of the concept of isolation. So tribes remain isolated from the mainstream society, which gives them a unique knowledge and cultural system distinct from mainstream knowledge system. So this is your introduction. You have to mention the word isolation, living. So they live isolated, and in body then we can start discussing that how the unique knowledge, how the tribal knowledge system is unique and different from mainstream knowledge and cultural system. So let us see how is it different. So what is unique in tribal knowledge system? Let us see. And you compare this with the mainstream knowledge system. So I compare this with mainstream knowledge. And we also compare this with our cultural system. Mainstream cultural system, how is it different? So in case of knowledge system, what are the unique points? What are the difference? So can I write that the tribal knowledge is more talking about sustainable development. It is more about sustainable development. Then it is non-scientific in nature. Non-scientific in nature. More of experience oriented. If it is not scientific, it is more based on experience. Then the knowledge is more simplistic in nature. Simplistic in nature. Simplistic, subsistence oriented. Simplistic, subsistence oriented and community oriented. So they take the entire community into picture while going for knowledge systems, and and if you and then I will write does not change for a long period of time. It does not change for a long period of time. So if you compare this with the mainstream knowledge is more exploitative in nature, The mainstream knowledge is more scientific oriented, we know this. The mainstream knowledge is more individual oriented, not community oriented. And the mainstream knowledge is subject to continuous questions and changes very quickly. With respect to uniqueness in the cultural system, what is unique in the cultural system here? Cultural system uniqueness with respect to religion, they have unique religious practices like naturism and ancestral worship. Then what is unique in their cultural system? They have unique dressing patterns which are very different from the mainstream. Then they have unique, language. Language is very unique, with a very different script. Sometimes they don't have a script also, so that is also very unique. And the cultural system is too much dependent upon forest. So these are two unique things: uniqueness with respect to knowledge system, uniqueness with respect to cultural system for tribes. So very simple question, 10 marker, 4 points in each area you have to write. Very simple to understand. So this is your answer number 9. Answer 9. And in conclusion, what we can write here? In conclusion, we can say that there is a continuous interaction between tribal knowledge systems and mainstream knowledge system. They are continuously interacting with each other, and the mainstream knowledge is continuously evolving because of interaction with tribal knowledge systems. So, it is not the case that tribal knowledge systems are working in isolation. No, they are also coming in contact with the mainstream culture nowadays. So there is a continuous evolution of both mainstream culture as well as traditional knowledge systems. So this is your answer number 9. Then we can write answer number 10. What is question 10? Let us see. Question number 10. Examine the role of gig economy in the process of empowerment of women in India. Very, very easy. Examine the role of gig economy in the process of empowerment of women in India. So let us see this question now. So answer number 10. First, we will talk about what is gig economy. In introduction, we will talk about gig economy. It was too much in news. Hindu also covered it in detail in its magazine. So in gig economy, in intro we can write that it is a temporary nature of job. It is not a permanent job, temporary nature of job, which does not offer any social protection. Then there is no written commitment on the number of years of service, and the payment is based on incentives. So the more number of deliveries you do, the more will be your payments. So this is the nature of gig economy. So this you can write in the introduction. Then come to the body. Body is again very simple. In body now you will approach the question by saying that examine the role of gig economy in the process of empowerment of women. How has it empowered women? So first point we can write women empowerment. It has created employment opportunities for women, especially in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, tier 3 cities, and for women working from home. For example, we can write here employment opportunities. Example, we can write for urban company. There are a lot of beauticians, technicians who are now working with urban company. So it is providing employment opportunity for women, and work from home, and also provided employment opportunity during COVID-19. So great opportunity for women to work from home. Then second, after employment opportunity, it breaks gender stereotypes. So women doing those kinds of jobs which they have not done in the past, which they did not do in the past. For example, women emerging as Uber drivers. Then third, after breaking stereotypes, these startups who are going for gig economy, they are selling lot of SHG products for women, SHG products made by women. Then next point, these gig economies offer a sort of play and plug jobs. They offer play and plug jobs. What are these play and plug jobs? You can join them as per your convenience. You can leave them as per your convenience. Then they provide support from work from home. I have already discussed here. So that's all. The 4 points we can write here. How they empower women to create employment opportunities, break gender stereotypes, provide market for SHG products, and they are a kind of play and plug jobs. So mother can take care of her child as well as of the work. Both the things can be easily balanced through gig economies. And the mother can also work as per her own convenience. That is what is play and plug. Now you will write in the body itself, or you can go to the conclusion because it is a 10 marker. You can say that there are some challenges with gig economy. There are a lot of challenges also. All is not good. So there are 4 main points in challenges. Since it is a temporary nature of job, there is no social security for women. She doesn't get any paid leaves. She doesn't get any, incentive. She doesn't get any maternity benefit leaves here. Then, there are cases of sexual harassment at workplace, and even sexual harassment at workplace law does not cover women working in the informal sector. So basically this has led to what is known as increased informalization of women workforce. This has increased. And the problem with increased formalization is that woman is empowered at a very lower level. She is not able to break the glass ceiling effect. Woman is not able to enter the higher hierarchy. She stays limited within the lower hierarchy itself. So these are some of the challenges which are present with the gig economy. So women empowerment is there, you agree, women empowerment is there, but there are certain challenges. Then you can write in conclusion only, the government must immediately come up with a code for, social security code for gig workers. Immediately come up with social security code for gig workers in order to empower women in the real sense. That is what we can say in the conclusion. Simple question can be answered very easily.
Now we have question number 11. From here the 15 markers questions start. Let us take the first question on the moderate politics. To what extent did the role of the moderates prepare a base for the wider freedom movement? Comment. Now this question is a very mainstream typical question. So there is no problem, anybody can write this answer who has prepared this basics of modern Indian history. The interesting thing is twofold. Firstly, what they have asked is base for the wider freedom movement. So you have to connect in your answer every contribution as a base towards future wider freedom movement. That connection is very important. And secondly, to what extent? Most people would forget this comment or to what extent. So it is asking not only positives but also limitations. However, you wouldn't have much room to expand upon limitations, so that will be the last few lines, that's all. If you see the previous questions that they have asked questions from both the sides, the positives of moderate contribution sometimes in some years or the limitations of the contributions in other years. For the first time UPSC has combined both the sides, positive and negative, by asking to what extent and comment. So you have two questions inside one question. Let us move on and see how to approach the answer. Introductions. I have thought of two possible introductions. A typical introduction is when you take a keyword and expand upon it, expound it. So if you know the moderate politics is the keyword, then you can write about it, introduce who the moderates are, what the programs, objectives, some leaders, some names, some time frame, phase, etc. That is a typical introduction, that is the point number one. You can also have a critical perspective, which is nothing but rhetoric, but it puts the perspective in place for the entire answer, which I personally think in this context would be a better or more suitable introduction type. For example, they could not take it to the masses, or their role may be buried later due to the role of Mahatma Gandhi or revolutionaries. Nonetheless, it was very foundational. So you are rephrasing the rhetoric and giving the perspective. So what was the foundational role? Then you expound upon that in the body. So what I have done here is categorized the role of moderates into three main baskets, just for the sake of memorizing them or analyzing them. The first category is political awareness. So the imperial character, the colonial character of this British government, British Raj, was laid bare by them through various types of criticisms, like finding out and then exposing the inherent racist tendencies of British government, or talking about the economic exploitation in the form of drain of wealth. So drain of wealth created the base of economic nationalism, and that was nothing but the political awareness of Indian masses to our level. The second category is political education. So it was the foundation of national politics. It's a major thing. So far the politics had been provincial, regional, local. They created the national headquarter or the institution for national politics, that is Indian National Congress. And through that institution and through its processes like sessions, resolutions, debates, voting, elections, they inculcated the culture of democratic politics in Indian masses. It's a huge contribution. It's a very slow and laborious process, but a huge contribution. You have them starting representing Indians in the bodies created by British government through various acts, although they were very hollow acts, not very effective. But the process has started. Indians now feel that they can be represented by their own people. And then they have the reform agenda. They don't have the complete emancipation, complete independence, Purna Swaraj formula, but they go for reform to avoid the direct confrontation with the British Raj. That's the second basket. And the third basket is because of these two things, they actually try to connect national movement with creation of nation. India is nation in the making. So national movement is the vehicle, is the means for not only freedom but also creation of a modern nation. That connection was made by them. That is a very important act. The political sphere and socio-cultural sphere are connected. However, because it's a comment type question, to what extent. So in a very brief manner you go to the other side also and talk about their nature, that their belief in the providential nature of British, they believed, at least in rhetoric, in the white man's burden. Then there is no mass politics because they wanted to avoid confrontation, and therefore their own social acceptability, their own mass base remained limited, and therefore the pressure that they could build upon the British also remained limited. So inherent limitations of constitutional politics inside the colonial structure, that is their limitation in a very short and terse manner. How do you conclude? Yet they showed the future path. Ultimately when Mahatma Gandhi comes, he combines both moderates and extremists into his style, or some other way you can conclude the answer. So it is a very typical question. What we have to do, we have to connect all of them one by one with the next phase of national movement, and so in the conclusion also. Okay. Next question. Question number 12. Now on the Gandhi, every year UPSC asks some question on Mahatma Gandhi, this dimension or that dimension. I will urge you to go through all the questions asked on Mahatma Gandhi in last 25-30 years and just make a list. There is a lot of repetition of topics. The questions on Gandhi versus Nehru, especially when it comes to the relationship between politics and religion, that is a very typical question. The contribution and comparison of Gandhi and Tagore when it comes to education, that is also a very typical question. Vardha education plan in itself has been asked multiple times by UPSC in the past, but for the first time they have asked clearly and only and directly on constructive programs as umbrella term. But the part by part, all these questions have been asked in the past. That is one thing. Second thing about this question is that this question can get little dicey if you try to analyze it too much. I will tell you how. The question is, bring out the constructive programs of Mahatma Gandhi during the NCM and CDM, 15 marker. Now if you focus too much on constructive program only during NCM and only during CDM, as the question tends to reveal, it will become difficult to pinpoint. On the other hand, if you go far away from this NCM CDM context completely and focus purely on the constructive program, that also will become problem. So, but you might do that. Why? Because most of you have read Bipin Chandra's book. Bipin Chandra talks about something called a struggle, truce, struggle, STS dash. In that we have NCM, then you have truce time when you have constructive program, and then you again have struggle, that is CDM. So NCM, constructive, CDM. But the question is asking about constructive during NCM and CDM also. So if you go by that STS, you might get confused also. But do not go into those nitty-gritties. It's a general studies question. It is a general question. We will give some context of NCM, CDM. We also will talk about otherwise the importance of constructive program in general of Mahatma Gandhi also. So that is okay. That is completely fine. The recent questions on Gandhi, they have asked various dimensions of Gandhi, and in the past, as I said, they have asked various dimensions of constructive program individually one by one. So this topic is a very hot topic, Gandhi. Let us look at the answer. How Gandhi himself wrote a book called Constructive Program, its meaning, etc. The book is very easily available online in a PDF format, but there is no need to read the book, don't worry. So introductions, I have talked about different possible introductions. One way could be about the brief introduction to the two movements context, NCM, CDM. Then other ways talk about or give a comment on Gandhi's understanding of the entire scope of things. Like he said, or he always believed that political action, personal transformation and constructive program were all equally necessary. So for him, political movement, social transformation and individual purification are not disconnected, disjointed, they are one and the same, they go together. If you want to simplify this, then you can say Mahatma Gandhi, for him the inner change of a person and external change of society and politics go hand in hand, they are connected to each other. That is why constructive program is necessary for any other political movement also. Or else you can talk about STS dash of Bipin Chandra. You can introduce question in various ways, all of them are equally valid. But in the answer, even though they have said bring out the constructive programs. Bring out means most of you would by default focus on the factual nature of the elements of the constructive program, but that is not sufficient. What I have done here is to organize those factual elements into 4 major buckets or 4 major categories that help in remembering the things, and also that categorization itself is a way of analysis. So, you have what being answered, what is the constructive program, and there are 4 core elements: equality, you have educational projects, you have economic self-reliance, and you have environmental efforts, all in the context of inner change and social change. In the equality section, you have ashrams, political campaigns, cooperatives, Hindu-Muslim unity, eradication of untouchability, eradication of gender divide, you have tribal people being included, and all those things. In the educational project, you have literacy campaign, basic numeracy, you have education about skills, political education, health education, training for non-violence, even all those things, basic education, Nai Talim, that actually came later on, but it is there. I would not use Nai Talim because Nai Talim word becomes important quite later, not during NCM or in between NCM CDM. Similarly, I have purposefully avoided the word Harijan over here because Harijan word was introduced by Mahatma Gandhi after CDM, but if you use it, it is okay. In the economic self-reliance, I have Khadi and Charkha, village industries, honey and other things. You also have crop diversification, labor unions in cities also, in factories. And then in environmental efforts, you have focus on entire community and sanitation and hygiene, naturopathy, we have all those things, local use. So, this is the entire gamut of constructive programs, but you do not have to use all of them. If you use 2, 3, 4 of them, that is good enough in your answer. The next point comes is the interesting one. This is what of the constructive program. We also have to answer why of the constructive program. If you do it in the introduction itself, as I have done here, these 2 points or one of these 2 points, it is okay, that is also doable. But if you make it half of your main body also, that is preferable. For example, in the why section, I have talked about what was his vision, why was he going for these constructive programs. We have individual change, social change and political change. Now, I have decontextualized them from NCM CDM, but you can put them in the NCM CDM context as well. With some examples of those movements, it is completely fine. You can talk of Nagpur Congress also, in which he made the constructive program mandatory for many people. A lot of things are there. So, individual, it is the increased power from within, self-reliance, fearlessness that prepares individual. You have social transformation, social cohesion, social unity, all these things coming out of it. And then political, you have the ground being created for mass mobilization. When you have keeping the moral high, training for non-violence, when there is no movement, the people are actively engaged in some kind of program. And importantly, what Mahatma Gandhi believed is simply disruptive forces are not enough. To remove the British is not enough. You need to be ready with the alternative vision, institution and capacity, and that is what is done by constructive programs. So, it was the program that was the construction of actual Purna Swaraj, self-purification for Purna Swaraj. So, you can talk of some philosophical terms also, although I suspect it would not occur to you in the heat of the movement on the ground in the exam hall. But if you mention at least 1 or 2 of these points, either in introduction or in body or in conclusion, that is good enough, not a problem. Now, we have next question, only question from world history. There arose a serious challenge to the democratic state system between the 2 world wars. Evaluate the statement. Now, I have couple of comments before we move on. Firstly, the question is not asking about only Europe, that is one thing. You should include examples from outside Europe also, like Japan, which is the most egregious example. Second comment, world history became part of syllabus for main exam in general studies only since 2013, and since then they have not asked this question. So, it is a new question, but it is a very typical question. If you read Arjun Singh NCERT, Arjun Dev NCERT, it is there. That is second comment. And the third comment is that the same question can be answered in multiple ways. We will see a couple of them now. But do not focus your answer entirely only on fascism in Germany and Italy. Nazi and Fasci forces, they are there, but that is not the entire answer. Answer goes much beyond that, because our mind naturally gravitated towards, okay, interwar year, democracy gone, means my Weimar Republic is gone. Who removed Weimar? What happened? Hitler and Mussolini does. So, you go to Germany, you come to Italy, that makes your entire answer. That answer will be only lopsided answer. You should avoid against those immediate tendencies of your recent memories. Let us look at the answer. Introduction. Firstly, you should define your time and space. So, the 20 years when the World War I ends in 1919 and World War II begins in 1939, you have 20 years of span, that is interwar years. In that 20 years, a huge transformation has happened. There are many countries which continue to remain democracies, but for majority of Europe, the monarchies of earlier era, Habsburg, Ottoman, etc., all of them are gone. In their place now has come liberal democracy in multiple states. That is phase 1 of transformation. In the phase 2, the very same liberal democracies start facing variety of problems. We will talk about that. And then emerges out of that totalitarian state. It could be both communist and fascist. So, you should talk about that transformation also. Soon the alternative to the monarchies was created in the form of totalitarian states, could be either fascist or communist. And those both types of dictatorships came into being. So, in the body you talk about end of World War I, end to monarchy in Europe, and beginning of liberal democracy in many new nations. Soon alternative to monarchy also emerged that replaced these democracies. It was a totalitarian state. We have two famous examples. One is communists. In 1917 in Russia, you had the beginning of USSR with communist revolution, which tried to be democratic, but because of inherent nature, ideology, civil war, external problems, internal problems, it ultimately became a very totalitarian dictatorship of first Lenin and then primarily Stalin. The Stalinist state emerged. It was a threat to democracy, because before 1917 there was an attempt to create a democratic state. In Germany and Italy, you have fascism coming up, and so in Spain, but Spain is not a very prominent example for us. But you should also include Tojo and his attempt of militaristic nature of state in Japan. Now, the question is not only what, but also why. Not only what, but also why. So, why these states which are newly emerging liberal democracies, why they collapsed? And that is why you have to talk about some points. The points are typical. Firstly, the problems of the First World War, the legacy of the First World War in the various shapes of economic destruction. You have the peace treaties and their problems, all those things. Secondly, although the economy started coming on its own, suddenly in 1929-30 you have the impact of the greatest political earthquake ever there was, that is Great Depression and the problems associated with that. And third is beginning or the rise of these ideologies of totalitarian state, maybe fascism or communism, and the problems. So, these are the basic problems. If you want to go for a very deeper analysis at all, you can talk of something called as the strong class of aristocratic landowners that was there in these countries, which opposed emergence of liberal democracy, and they preferred some kind of dictatorship, either monarchical or in later era totalitarian. In the end, we have the failure of these states and erosion of democratic values ultimately led to World War II. So, the attempt of creation of liberal democracies was a very short-lived attempt, and that was soon backfired. However, this is a very good, decent, normal and mark-fetching way of writing answer. But there is other approach also, and that approach is in the next slide. that you see not all states, every state faced the problem, but not all states, democratic states collapsed. So I can divide the states in two parts. Firstly, the pre-World War I democratic legacy, which states had the democracy going before World War I for at least some period, and which are new democracies that are emerging, because the question is not differentiating only on new democracy or old democracy, it is talking about democracy in general. So I have two types, one which are very old, ones which are emerging after the end of World War I. And then I can see this table, democracy, did it survive or did not survive? So what I see when I do this kind of analysis is that the newer democracies are the ones which have largely not survived. And the older democracies, although they also faced the problems, but they somehow managed to survive. So if you read the question again, the question reads, there arose a serious challenge to the democratic state system between the two world wars. That's all. That's all. What kind of challenge we have already listed them. Which states we have also listed them. But did all states collapse? No. Some states collapsed, some states did not. So what would be the reason behind that? So the newer states did not have deeper democracy at social level. They are low, there is low level of socio-economic modernization. They have many ethnic fault lines of linguistic, religious, etc. And they have very limited experience of working out this democratic setup. And then, as I said, the class of landowners which was entrenched in the system, all those things. So these new states were more fragile and they broke down. The older democracies were able to sustain the shocks. If you can bring out this point, you don't have to draw the table, that is not required. You don't have to write all these names, that is also not required. But in the conclusion or somewhere in the body, if you are able to inculcate only that one line of viewpoint and differentiate between the responses of older democracies and newer democracies that came out of World War I, that will take your answer to a much higher level. Otherwise, if you don't do this, if you write only this answer, this also is equally good enough if you write all the points. Okay. So what would be my inference? Firstly, do not focus only on modern, only on culture. All parts have to be prepared. Secondly, the questions on post-independence and world history may come some year, may not come another year, but that does not mean that we are at the liberty of not doing them. We have to do them thoroughly. And thirdly, you have to focus a lot on previous year questions, because as we have seen, 5 out of 6 questions are nothing but completely repeated in one way or another if you look at the questions of 20-30 years and not only 5 or 10 years. And fourthly, the skill of writing answer in 150 to 250 words requires a lot of answer writing practice that you should do.
We come to question number 5. Question number 5 says, briefly mention the alignment of major mountain ranges of the world and explain their impact on the local weather conditions with example. Now, this is something what you always read in your geography section, that you have mountains being discussed in one or the other way, and you know mountains are a great topographic barrier, and more so for the major mountain systems. So when they are asking about the mountain ranges alignment and they are talking about how do they impact on the local weather conditions, you know, one, mountains alignment would be related in terms of the windward and the leeward side of the mountains. Windward side would be the side which is facing the winds which are coming from one area, and imagine if the winds are moisture-laden winds, so the windward side the air would rise and would become a reason for the cloud formation, and because of this upliftment of air on the windward side of the mountain, you'll have precipitation, humid conditions, and when the same air will go on the other side of the mountain, which is called leeward, you'll have either very less rain or in fact sometimes rain shadow zone with dry conditions as such. And we find it so in number of mountains of the world, the same kind of results. So this is one way you can discuss the mountain range vis-a-vis the weather impact it has. Second is, And this is something what really would separate your question or your answer from other students' answer. One very less popular important point is that even the aspect of the mountain, the slope of a mountain is important. By aspect we mean the position of a area vis-a-vis the sun's rays. So there are some slopes of the mountains which are sun-facing slopes and the others are not. And you will find that the microclimatic conditions, even at the same height in a mountainous region, may not be same on the sun-facing side and the side which is not facing the sun. For example, when you look at the Himalayas, which are east-west in orientation, the alignment is east-west, or we may say, technically speaking, the strike of the Himalayas is east-west. So we find the southern slopes which are there, they are sun-facing slopes, whereas the slopes on the northern side, on the Chinese side, are not facing the sun. So that makes a great difference between the climatic conditions and hence vegetation conditions on the south and the north in terms of the slope, in terms of aspect of the slope. And the third thing which you can bring in your answer is about the local winds. There are the microclimatic influences in certain areas of the world, like for example, the mountains in Europe or the Rockies in North America, that there would be some particular movements of the air which are now localized in terms of the aerial extent and even in terms of the time of the year. So we call them as local winds, and they have important influences on the weather conditions. Now, so in the very first paragraph, when you give the introduction, I write, mountains as topographic barriers have prominent effects on one or more elements of climate by blocking or by uplifting or diverting airflow. The side of a mountain range facing the wind would be the windward side and the sheltered side would be the leeward side, or you can go for focusing the point, the concept called aspect, that is the side facing the sun or the side which is not facing the sun. All these are likely to have significantly different weather or climatic conditions. Now, since we are supposed to give the examples here of the major mountain systems, we can take Himalayas here, and you know, Himalayas have what kind of strike? By strike we mean how exactly the mountains of Himalayas are placed on the earth's surface. And you know, the strike of the Himalayas is east-west in orientation. The Himalayas are running east-west and they are running for 3,000 kilometers from Karakoram near Kabul to Arunachal Pradesh in India. The range plays a crucial role in giving India a tropical monsoon type climate. That is, moisture-laden winds which are coming from the Indian Ocean, perhaps they are being stored with the Himalayas and the winds are being asked by the mountain system, which moisture are you taking along with? And when the answer comes that it's from Indian Ocean, perhaps the mountain system is stopping those winds to release that moisture right within India itself. And you know, in the monsoons mechanism, the Indians understand that one major role for the monsoon to happen in this country is provided by the mighty mountains, the Himalayas. And these very mountains act as a barrier for the cold winds of Central Asia to reach India. So imagine if Himalayas were not there on the earth's surface, India would have been very, very different country and we would have been having a very different kind of culture. In fact, I'll say the history of India would have been very different if Himalayas were not there. So not only in terms of climate, I would say we can go beyond that, the very history and the culture of that area would differ in terms of the mountain's presence or absence as such. So alignment of the Himalayas is very important. That one in terms of giving India a tropical monsoon type climate, saving India from the cold winds of Central Asia or even North Asia. And then I said that sun-facing slopes are on the southern side, so they will also give variations in the microclimatic elements. And then I have given the example of Atlas Mountains. You all know Atlas Mountains are there in the northwest corner of Africa, and these mountains are separating the Mediterranean basin and the Atlantic basin from the Sahara Desert. So it means Sahara Desert falls in the rain shadow zone because it's on the south. So we say the Atlas form a climatic barrier between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean ocean basins and Sahara, and you know, rainfall would fall on the north side, whereas Sahara would be on the southern side, and that would become a rain shadow zone. So this is one very important point for supporting this particular question's requirement, that how the alignment of the mountains is a reason for affecting the local weather conditions. Now similarly we go for Andes Mountains in South America. You all know Andes are running from north to south along in the eastern region of South America, and you know on the west, Andes are running on the western side of South America, and these are related, means this particular example is related to the Atacama's desert. You know Atacama is one of the driest deserts of the world, and Atacama is having something more interesting. It is a two-sided rain shadow. So we find the driest parts of Atacama are sandwiched between two mountain ranges, one the Andes and the other which are on the coast, the Chilean coastal region. So I write that these Andes are running for about 8,000 kilometers in western South America, and they are running parallel to the coast from north to south, from Venezuela to Tierra del Fuego. The most arid region of Atacama is situated between two mountain chains, and this prevents the moisture through advection. Advection means through horizontal movement. So moisture is not able to come from both the sides, that is the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean. So again a great example to support what is required in this particular question, that how mountains alignment is important for affecting the weather conditions. Then the example we can take is the North American region. On the west we have the Rocky Mountains in North America, and on the east we have Appalachian Mountains. And since there is an absence of east-west mountain in North America, so we find that North American region becomes a very large ground for the air masses of the world to interact easily. So we have air masses coming from the higher latitudes and the air masses going from the lower latitude, and they interact very freely in the North American region as such. So it is all because of the fact that we do not have east-west kind of alignment of the mountains in North America. So I write right here, the North American continent becomes a prominent area of air mass interaction. The polar air sweeps southward and tropical air flows northward unhindered. And second example I can give here is, since we have the Rockies on the western side of the North American continent, so these mountains do not allow the Pacific air mass to go and give much precipitation in the eastern side of North America. So I write here, Pacific air mass brings widespread cloudiness and heavy precipitation to the western mountainous coastal regions. And by the time the same Pacific air mass would reach the interior of the continent, it is moderate in temperature and clear skies. It means it doesn't have much of moisture left. It doesn't result in cloudy conditions. And the next example I said in the beginning, that we can give example of local winds also. And the example here is about the Chinook winds in the Rocky Mountains, that these winds, which are referred to as a snow eater. So remember, these winds, like for example Chinook, which is one of the examples of the local winds, they originate whenever there is a steep pressure difference between the windward and the leeward side of the mountain. And when the air blows along this pressure gradient, it is going to have the influences on the weather conditions. On the leeward side, when the air is going for a descending motion, it gets automatically warmed, and for that reason, Chinook would become a snow eater on that side when the air is descending and affecting the local conditions there in a very significant way. And we have many such examples of these kind of local winds in parts of Europe, where you have mountains like Alps and other mountains. So you have the entire region getting affected by these number of local winds. Since we had limited kind of scope in terms of the number of words, so this one example can be given. And now to impress the examiner, I can bring one more idea in my answer, and that is that besides the alignment, the mountains also give us something in terms of a parallel of latitudinal zonation of life in terms of height in the mountains. Means if I was to sum up in 3 words, altitude mimics latitude. It means as I go up in height, the climatic conditions, the weather conditions will change almost the same way as they change when I go from equator to the poles. So, mountains make an important control on weather and climate, and altitude in mountains mimics latitude in terms of climate and vegetation or life zones. So, at the end, in the conclusion, such a kind of point would impress the examiner that you have given some other dimension also. So, you have discussed. Once again, let's look at the structure of the answer. So first you go with the questions requirement right from the very first sentence, that you say mountains are acting as a topographic barrier, and then you tell the importance of this alignment in terms of the weather influences, the climatic conditions influence, and having given that point, then you go for the illustrations as demanded by the question. So this is what I meant in the beginning when I said, write what is being asked. Remember, even if you have a limited content, but if you are really training your mind during this preparation period for writing what is being asked, you will find, despite limited content, your answer writing will improve. That you have a quality answer, because right from the first moment you are training your mind, you are asking your mind to write what is relevant for this question's requirement. So always, I would say, not only in examination, even in life, learn this particular expertise, that I write, I speak what is required, what is being asked, and the moment you do that, you are appreciated by the audience immediately, or in this case by your examiners, that at least there is a clear reflection that you are attempting to speak or write what is being asked. Now, so when you prepare for answer writing, please think on these lines, that whenever you read a question, think of what exactly is the demand of this question. Identify the keywords in the question and revolve your answer around those keywords. And conventional framework would always help you, as I said in the beginning, the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Introduction should tell the examiner that you know the answer, and the body, you just prove it that yes, I know it very well, and in the conclusion, impress him further with some new dimension. Now we come to question number 6, and this question really has great content, means it is really difficult to summarize this question in just 250 words. Now, question is, how do the melting of the Arctic ice and the glaciers of the Antarctic differently affect the weather patterns and human activities on the earth? Explain. Now, first of all, I have given more content here for the reason that when you will be writing your answers in the examination, you know that finally the student would have the limited recall for the questions. But to give you the kind of approach, there is a little more content being given, but it is just to guide you that how you should proceed with the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. So, first we will write about the ice we have in the Arctic and Antarctic region. So, see, the first point, I tell the examiner that about 10% of the Earth's land surface is covered with ice today, but more than 96% of that total is in Antarctic and Greenland ice caps. And out of these two, Antarctic ice cap is by far the most extensive ice cap on the earth, representing as much as 85% of the total land ice. And you would have read in your things relating to climate change that polar areas are giving us much faster kind of changes associated with climate change as compared to the rest of the areas as such. Remember one important point, and that is that in the higher latitudes of the world, we have an ice cover, snow and ice cover. And this snow and ice cover has albedo, which is really very high. By albedo, we mean the reflectivity of a surface. That out of the total incident energy, how much part is being reflected back. Now, snow and ice as the surfaces have very high albedo, ranging somewhere between 70 to 90%. Now, the cause of worry today is that in these higher latitudes, this snow and ice is melting at an alarming rate because of global warming. So, see the point. Global warming is leading to more of melting of the snow and ice, and because of more and more melting of snow and ice, the area's albedo is changing. It means as more and more snow and ice melts, the earth is going to absorb more heat. It means this is a situation where cause leads to an effect, and the effect becomes the cause for amplification. Means that is, it is amplifying the very basic cause. That is, global warming leads to melting of snow and ice, and with more of melting, you have more heat being absorbed by that area because there is no snow for reflecting that much of energy what it was doing earlier. And as a result, you have the global warming getting further amplified in this region because of the absorption of heat more in that area. So this is what is called as positive feedback mechanism. And in Arctic region, we have this really on a clear scale. And that is what is a cause of worry for future, that here we are going to have these changes because of climate change much earlier and perhaps on a much larger scale. And this is going to be one of the tipping points for climate change. So we cite most dramatic indications of global warming have come from the polar regions. During the last 50 years, average temperatures in the Arctic have been increasing at about twice the rate as in lower latitudes. In Western Canada and Alaska, winter temperatures are about 3 degrees higher than 3 degrees centigrade higher than what they were higher today than what they were just 50 years back. And the observed retreat of the Arctic sea ice leads to a positive feedback loop. This is what I call that cause leads. Remember, global warming leads to melting of snow and ice. And because of this effect, the melting of snow and ice, there is further more global warming for the reason Earth starts absorbing more. And that is what is called positive feedback mechanism. It is suggested by some models that summer Arctic ice cover could actually disappear by the end of this century. So it means it certainly would be really leading to further much more of dramatic changes in the near future. That by the end of this century, you'll have perhaps something what would lead to the changes we cannot really predict at this time. But Earth would be perhaps very different if this ice cover changes or disappears there. And with this, there are kind of implications which are numerous in nature. So I write a few of them, that when you have melting of snow and ice, there will be an increase in the sea level. So we say the consequent sea level rise would lead to increased coastal erosion around the Arctic region. Further, the fresh water entering the ocean could reduce salinity and potentially alter the deep ocean global conveyor belt circulation. You know that ocean currents make a conveyor belt for energy transfers, and they are going to change because of this melting. Currents like Labrador and Oyashio are going to change in a big way, and they would make one important influence on the kind of exchanges of heat which take place between the lower and higher latitudes because of these conveyor belts. Now, then we have a problem that the whole area's geography is going to change. Scientists have already started finding that tundra climatic region of Alaska is turning itself into something which is more of the shrub kind of land, shrublands. It means permafrost is having its changes, and because of that we have more of the methane and carbon dioxide being released, because permafrost would get, like there would be melting of the water there, which is, remember, permafrost means permanently frozen subsoil portion. So as the moisture would go for melting, would melt, then you'll have the conditions changing, and there would be more release of carbon dioxide and methane, and these would further, these are greenhouse gases, and they are going to have further more global warming as such. Then in terms of the immediate effect we see today, that polar bears are having some problem in their existence today. They are having difficult times because the summer ice which was there in the world ocean, in the Arctic region, that is now disappearing. It is having it is not there the way it used to be there earlier in terms of time as well as in terms of scale. So I write here, polar bears regularly hunt for the seal pugs and the other prey on the sea ice during the summer season. But because the sea ice is breaking up earlier than in the past, the polar bears are facing increasingly challenging times. Now this is about the Arctic region. In the Antarctic region, we have disintegration of the ice shelves. Now again, as I said in the beginning of the discussion today, that questions do not come from vacuum. That is the point every student has to understand. But remember, questions will have some reason. Means examiners will have some reason for a particular question being asked in the question paper. And it is many a times related to the newspaper there. That what all has been there in the newspapers of the last 1.5 years. And we have been reading in newspapers that there has been the disintegration of the shells, like Larsen, there have been A, B, C shells, and on the basis of these kind of newspaper current affairs, there is certainly a question expected always, because as these ice shells are disintegrating, you'll find they will provide the passage for more of the ice in the interiors to go as they will be entering into the ocean, and as you have more and more of the glaciers going into the waters, the sea levels would certainly rise even in the southern region. So you have Antarctic ice shelves breaking up, and in the future, with the ice shelves gone, the continental ice may flow faster into the ocean, resulting in sea level rise. Remember, ice shelf is the ice which is attached to the coastal area. And when it is breaking up, it is going into the ocean and providing the passage for the continental ice to enter the ocean. And as that more and more of it rises, it enters the ocean, sea levels would rise. Remember, continental, the ice shelf which is there, that is a part of the ocean itself, but it is attached to the coast. So it is not a reason for the rise of the sea level. But once this shelf would break, it would become a reason for more and more of ice from the continental areas to go into the ocean, and that would raise the sea level. Now, since all this is related to global warming, so the question is about the impacts. Remember, in the beginning the question was that we had question asking us that how do the melting of the Arctic ice and glaciers of the Antarctic differently affect the weather patterns and human activities. So if you have mentioned in the beginning here, you need to reduce it for the real answer finally. And now I mention a few more which are going to be there, and as per the requirement one can use that in the answer. And this is one very important, when the question is asking what kind of impact it would have on human activities. The northern sea route, you have been seeing this in the newspaper, that as more and more of ice melts in the Arctic region, there is more and more of the chances of the northern sea route to become more popular. Means, and in fact you would have seen some countries like Russia, China, etc. have already started participating. Means they want that this route should get more popular, and they are now claiming their rights over the resources which are there in this region. And remember, on one side we are having a fascination that yes, a new sea route is emerging which is going to reduce the distance between the Eastern Asia and Europe in big way. The sea routes would become much shorter than what they are otherwise between Eastern Asia and Europe. But scientists believe there are going to be very adverse climatic effects because of this opening of the new sea route or this sea route getting more popular. Running from the Bering Sea near the Russia-Norway border all the way to the Bering Strait between Siberia and Alaska, the Northern Sea Route could become an essential route for the extraction and transportation of resources, including hydrocarbons from the Arctic. And this itself may have its own very adverse climatic effects. So this would become one very important reason for amplifying the global warming as such. Now, the next impact is that even a modest increase in the sea level will cause widespread retreat of shorelines, and it would result in inundation of many coastal areas which are heavily populated. So this is another important influence in terms of the melting of this ice in the Arctic region and the Antarctic shelves as such. Then you have, and you already have seen this, that extreme events are becoming more frequent these days. So you have tropical cyclones becoming more intense and more frequent in certain parts of the world. The latitudes, the mid-latitude cyclones which are there, they are going to change their intensities and their paths and their frequencies also because of this. Then precipitation patterns are going to change, that there will be increases perhaps in the higher latitudes, that there will be more precipitation, and there will be further decreases in the precipitation in the subtropical areas. Remember, all these kinds of findings are because of the kind of modeling we do. We're not very clear that what all will happen in the future, but these are the things which are being suggested by the global circulation models. And then you may have the more extreme events like heat waves, heavy precipitation, etc. become more frequently in different parts of the world. You may have tropical diseases getting more prevalent in the other latitudes, as means they may go beyond their present limits in terms of latitude. They may shift to higher, means they may include some further higher latitudes. Then similarly, the plant species and animal species are going to shift latitudinally from the lower latitude towards higher latitudes, and similarly there may be shift of these the species of flora and fauna even in terms of height in the mountains, because we see there is always a parallel between altitudinal zonation and latitudinal zonation of life zones as such. So we are going to see changes, the shifts of flora and fauna species in terms of latitude as well as in terms of height in the mountains as such. And the important point the human beings need to remember now, that, and this is the most troubling finding of IPCC, that global temperatures are projected to continue increasing and sea level to continue rising even if the concentration of greenhouse gases are stabilized immediately. So it means time is really running out for humanity. That climate change is very much a reality today, and we need to act. And remember, even if we act, even today, if we start really doing some solid measures for tackling this climate change, still we are going to have adverse effects. But yes, if we act now in a significant way, if we go for those measures which are being suggested by scientists, then we would be able to control the climate change within the limits perhaps which we can handle better in future. It will be not really leading to extreme problems for future generations if we are able to control the climate change impacts, but to a particular desired limits as such. But they are bound to happen, that is very clear. The kind of changes which already are being seeing in we are seeing in the nature, they suggest that it's a process which is already on. Now, we come to question number 7. This question is about discuss the multi-dimensional implications of uneven distribution of mineral oil in the world. Now, you know, mineral oil is something which is there in every field of life today. Now, in the introduction, I first give the point about what is there. The real basis of this question is uneven distribution of mineral oil. So first I support that point. Yes, that there is a very uneven distribution of mineral oil on the earth's surface. And then I give a statistics. Remember, you must collect statistics of the important areas on which the questions are expected. And how do I know where are the questions expected? This is all known from the current affairs and from the subject. That is, there are certain areas which are the core areas of your syllabus. So my first suggestion would be here, one very important suggestion would be that as you prepare for this examination, keep on collecting some facts about the core areas of your examination syllabus, plus the facts which you find in the newspaper. And on a regular basis, keep revising them. And I tell you, the facts you remember would be handy, would be very useful for tackling questions in your preliminary examination as well as in the main examination, and furthermore even in the interview. Remember, when you make a statement in the interview and you support that statement with certain valid statistics, that carries much more weightage. One question's answer may impress the board and that may carry the day for you. But remember, why we are not able to use these statistics, why we are not able to remember? The reason is we never go for putting them in the proper shape. So as you prepare for this examination, keep on collecting the facts for the relevant important core areas of your examination syllabus and the kind of things you understand important from reading the newspaper, and keep them in such a way that they are handy always and you keep revising them. And remember, once you revise them, they get embedded in your mind and you can use them as and when you require them. And facts really would help you in all the three stages of the examination. So this is a simple point. If I write in the introduction that supports the very point that yes, there is an uneven distribution of mineral oil, that Persian Gulf region has more than 50% of the proved resources, proved reserves, and Central and South America has about 17%, North America has 6%. So mentioning this in the very beginning is something of the main part of the question itself, that uneven distribution. So this is what I say, every line should speak the answer for the question. It should be part of your answer, no irrelevant, no line in the answer which is really not having any kind of meaning for the question. So having given this, then I tell, now I'm going to move myself to understand that this uneven distribution of oil has implications in many fields of our human life today, in terms of many different fields of the world society today. And to make this point, I first create a reason for it. All right, the petroleum rock oil of the 19th century today has become an industrial giant in the present times, and as a result, this uneven distribution has a number of multidimensional implications of the world society as listed and illustrated below. Remember, when you read about the oil resource, you will get to know that from First World War time, this oil's importance started increasing in a big way. And the real story starts for this question from 1970, early 70s, 1973-74, when the countries in the West Asian region used this oil, the surplus oil monopoly they had, as a political weapon, as a geopolitical tool against the Western societies. And we had the first oil shock of the world. And from here started the kind of things what this question demands. Remember, when the world society experienced the first oil shock in 1973-74, the one thing which was expected but never happened was the decrease in the consumption of this oil. Remember, the oil had become so important for industry and other areas of life that its consumption did not decline. But what other things started were, number one, focus on conservation of the resource. Because it was understood that if you conserve 1 barrel of oil, it is equivalent to not importing that 1 barrel. So that conservation started as one of the implication of this uneven distribution. Because see, since it was uneven, only then these people could use it as a geopolitical weapon. And you might also remember from your reading of the newspapers that even Russia has used such kind of the natural gas reserves against Ukraine as a geopolitical weapon. So this importance of this oil resource as a geopolitical weapon comes only for the reason that there is a clear uneven distribution of this oil in the world geography as such. And having given this point that is being used as a geopolitical tool, means it has geopolitical dimensions, and this first case I have given you that Arab countries laid an embargo on the oil exports to the US and Western Europe in 73-74, and Russia did the same, almost a similar kind of thing was done against Ukraine. And then you have oil price volatility, that is, you have a lot of instability in the prices of this oil, and that really creates number of problems worldwide for developing countries. And in the context you have that there is a cartelization by OPEC, and now you have OPEC plus. So all these kind of things would be there in the answer here. Then you have energy conservation, that one of the important implications of this tool being used, this oil being used as a geopolitical tool was that they started conservation measures worldwide, and more importantly, this all gave us, this uneven distribution of oil has given impetus for further explorations. That other countries of the world also started exploring that do they have such kind of reserves in their own areas, and over a period of time we found many of them. For example, we have found these reserves in North Sea and Mexican Gulf region. And then there is another new pursuit which has started, that pursuit to discover new energy resources. See, world has understood that we must have more resources. Our basket for energy should be more diversified. One thing is clear to the world society, that we are not going to have any decline in the requirements of energy. With more and more of modernization in the different parts of the world, we are going to need much more energy. So it means, one, you need more resources, but at the same time you also understand that perhaps oil and coal and these energy sources are going to remain important for humanity for near future, as these, even if I say not for all the times to come, but they are really important for the near future, because as we are looking for other sources, this particular conventional source certainly has to give us the base for the present industrialization and other things as such. Now, so there is a pursuit to discover new energy resources which are renewable in nature and which are more cleaner sources as such. Then if I was to give one implication of it, after the 73-74 oil shock, US went for creating what is called petroleum reserve. So now you have petroleum reserves in the countries, that if you have any emergency, then you can always release those reserves for taking care of that situation. And then you have developing economies having problems in their balance of trade. Remember, there's a large mismatch between the producers and consumers of crude oil. And then this oil is suddenly a very strategic kind of resource today. All related developments underscore the importance for nations to develop energy supplies to the interests of their national security. So these are the different kind of means. This goes all beyond economics as such, that it is not just one simple resource. It is so important for world society today that everything is moving around this energy source, and it has so many implications in different fields. It means, like in one way I can say, the first point which I mentioned, that geopolitics which it is attached to, that is the most important thing. Because when you start talking about geopolitics, it means you are talking about geographical causation for international politics. And what is this geographical causation in this question? Oil is restricted in terms of its distribution to certain areas. That uneven distribution of oil which is there, that has created a reason for international politics. And you know, when politics comes, you have all important dimensions would be attached to it. And that is perhaps was the reason for the question being asked. And remember, again, this question is not out of vacuum. it was there, means these kind of things were being discussed throughout the year or much before that also, because of the variations in the prices, the changes which are taking place in the oil, the kind of problems it was, then OPEC plus and all other such kind of developments are the reason for the question in the examination. So the point I'm trying to say again and again is that do remember that one, the questions will come from your subject matter, the syllabus which is there in the UPS syllabus for this examination, but what particular questions may emerge, that you have to relate to the things what the nation is talking about in the last 1.5 years, right? And you will find that all what we have seen in these 7 questions, it was all there in the international and national background, and they were all there parts of your newspaper reading. Now, so I sum up my presentation by saying that go for practicing answer writing with one single observation in mind, with one simple guideline, that I write what is being asked in this particular question. So the very first line, you ask your mind to think on the requirements of the question. And remember, with little practice, you'll find that this becomes a particular approach. And once it becomes an approach for you, you'll find you have 2 clear advantages by this particular thought process. That we always think about what is required in this examination question, then you will find your answers would be more meaningful, would be given more score by the examiners, because there would be quality answers. And second, by not writing anything, say, which is not relevant, you are saving your time, and plus you are saving the number of words, because remember, one challenge is writing an answer, that you must know the answer. And second challenge many times is that you are not able to sum up that question's answer in the number of words which are there, 150 or 250 words. And remember, one, you go far the limit of the word limit which is given. One, you will be penalized by the examiner for writing too long. And second thing, that you may also get penalized with the fact that you are going to have less, you will not be able to answer all the questions in the examination in the given time as such. So, in my understanding, the strategy for handling main examination questions is that you write as many questions answers possible, means more the questions you answer, better is your chance for appearing in the interview. And how can you answer more of the questions? Number one, relates to your preparation, that your preparation must be wider with the current affairs as the background. And second, that when you write in the examination, you write in such a way that your answers are very crisp. Remember, you need to keep the things simple, straight. You need to have a crisp required answer there on the sheet, and it saves you a lot of time, and then it saves number of words, and that makes you have the more questions being answered in the stipulated time in the examination hall. And remember, remember that to have a good answer writing in the examination hall, you need to train your mind to think before you go to the examination hall. Remember, we very often fail in the examination hall to think about the points for a particular question, for the reason we never train our mind to think in a more efficient way. So please, in this preparation period, train your mind to think in a particular more efficient and more logical way for the requirements of the question, the examination hall. So thinking about thinking in the examination hall is the theme I leave it here, that you must start thinking today about the thinking process you have to do in the examination hall. So don't think for the first time in the examination hall. Start training your mind how the mind should think in the examination hall for finding the right ideas in the right sequence for the question's requirements. So if you do that way, then perhaps you will find that your answer writing would certainly improve and you will be able to tackle the examination papers much better.
Question number 17. Question number 17. What are the main socio-economic implications arising out of development of IT industries in major cities of India? So this is also quite simple. So you have to write what are the socio and economic implications. So we can divide our answer into two parts, social implications and economic implications. So let us write the answer quickly here. So we are now answering question number 17 answer. What you can write in the intro part? What we can write in the intro part? We can say that there is a rise of IT hubs in the country. You can name some IT hubs like Gurgaon, then Hyderabad, Chennai, Bengaluru. So there is a rise of IT hubs in these cities, and which has led to many socio-economic problems as well as advantages. So now if I come to the body, what are the social implications? Let us write social implications of development of IT industry. So first social implication is rise of middle class. Now rise of middle class leads to increased consumerism, Then second point, nuclearization of families because of migration to these cities. Nuclearization of families, say what happens? There is isolation in living, isolated living. Then IT hubs are very well globalized. So IT hubs promote globalization, they increase globalization in food and dressing patterns, and this also makes the culture cosmopolitan in nature, social implication. And lastly, it creates problem of negative regionalism, negative regional in the form of sons of the soil doctrine. So this is what we are trying to understand here, and this happened recently also in Bangalore. This happened recently. So these are social implications. So you can elaborate. I am just giving you a broad view. You can elaborate on this point of negative regionalism to a great extent. 250 words you have to cover. Then after social implication, we write economic implications. क्या हैं इसके? Let us see the economic implications. Rise of gig economy. Social implication, you can also write one more point, women empowerment in social implication, because women is also working in IT industry and there is rise of gig economy. So women empowerment. So rise of gig economy is the economic implication. Then startup hubs, then startup booms. So the booming service sector, the rise of booming service sector, important contributor to GDP. Then it creates problem of urban sprawl. It creates urban sprawl. Urban sprawl leads to booming of real estate market. Real estate market it gets a boom, and there is increase in level of inequalities also. There is increase in level of inequalities between those who are doing well-paying jobs versus the lower level jobs in IT, like call center jobs, well-paying jobs, high-skilled coding jobs. So these are the economic implications of IT industries in major cities. So there will be only intro and body, no need for writing conclusion in such kind of answers, not required conclusion. Then next question is the next answer 18. Let us see the question number 18 now. It was a very, very simple question, this 17th question. Then 18th question, discuss the main objectives of population education. This is the keyword here, population education, and point out the measures to achieve them in India in detail. So what are the main objectives of population education? So again, intro, body, conclusion. Answer 18, intro, body, conclusion. In intro you will write what is population education. What is population education? So what is population education? Making the people aware about the benefits of limited population and the negatives of too much population is population awareness. Is it okay? Is population education. Basically population education is nothing but awareness regarding the aspects of population. Awareness regarding the aspects of population. This is what is population awareness. Now, what are the main objectives of population awareness? In objectives you write, in body you write, why India needs population education. Yes, so what are the reasons India needs population education? Yes, please tell me why, what are the objectives of population education? So, in order to control the population, India has one of the highest population in the world. So, in order to go for population control and explaining the people what are the benefits of limited family size, what are the benefits of limited, then making people aware how to reduce fertility rates, making the people aware about the new technologies, new contraceptive technologies, directly we can write, making aware about new contraceptive technologies and how to increase their use. Both are very important to use. Then population education also includes aspects related to migration, how to control migration from rural areas to urban areas. This is also a very important aspect of population education. And making people aware about the role of the role of women and education in population control. This is also very essential, role of women and education in population control. So these are the 4 main objectives of population education. Now, how these objectives can be achieved? Again, we can write 4 points of how these objectives can be achieved. Mobilization of community healthcare worker called Asha. Asha plays a very important role in family planning in rural areas. Family planning in rural areas. Then the government has released National Population Policy 2000, where the focus of national population policy is from population control to population management. Population control to population management. Then recently the government has increased the age of marriage for girls. This will definitely bring down fertility rates. Marriage of girls. Then including sex education in school curriculums. In school curriculum. And you can write one more point, mobilizing women into SHG groups. Mobilizing women into SHG groups. So the empowerment of women will definitely lead to population control. So we have answered both the aspects, discussed the main objectives of population education and point out the measures. So these are the measures which are measures to achieve them in detail. Is it okay? So you can expand these points. I have given the main broader framework. Take it clear? So this is what, and in conclusion what will you write? And in conclusion that the government must implement National Population Policy 2000 in the right spirit, by managing the population, not controlling it. Managing, not controlling it. Control measures like one child policy will result in complete failure. Population control can only be done through a long-term approach. That's all. That much is enough in conclusion. There are no shortcuts to population control. It is a long-term measure. That is what you will say here in answer 18. Then let us see question number 19. Question number 19 says, what is cryptocurrency? Question number 19 says, what is cryptocurrency? How does it affect global society and how it is affecting Indian society also? So very simple. In intro you will write, what is cryptocurrency? What are the aspects of cryptocurrency? In body you will write, it has two parts. How does it impact global society and how does it impact Indian society? Very simple thing. And there is no need to write conclusion in this answer, not required to write conclusion at all, direct question. So what is cryptocurrency? You know, these are virtual currencies. These are virtual currencies which work on anonymity and blockchain technology. Blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies. Now, how does it impact the global society? So we can write the impact, positive and negative impact. So what is the positive impact of cryptocurrency on global society? So the positive impact is it has strengthened globalization. It has strengthened globalization. How it has strengthened globalization? It has created a team of social crypto influencers, global crypto influencers, and it has also, this blockchain technology in itself is a global chain, so it promotes globalization. Second, it creates new avenues for employment. New avenues for employment have been created. So many people are working on blockchain technologies. Then the blockchain technology given by cryptocurrencies have led to evolving of of evolving of use of blockchain technology in other areas of governance. Then there is a new class of global investors. There is emerging a new class of global investors who are ready to, invest in cryptocurrencies and take risk. This is new class which can take risk. What are the negative impacts of cryptocurrency on global society? What are the negative impacts? Cryptocurrencies are not backed by any government, so they are too risky investments, and too risky investments leads to suicides. Then second, the cryptocurrency market has created lot of inequalities between crypto haves and crypto have-nots. Then third, it has led to increase in global cyber crimes all over the world. And again, there are, again, the cryptocurrencies are actually accessible to few only. Very few. There are haves, again, there are have-nots. Haves, those who have knowledge about cryptocurrency, have-nots, those who do not have knowledge about cryptocurrencies. So, and there is something called as FOMO also. It has started a new trend of FOMO, fear of missing out in crypto market, which leads to people taking risk and ultimately committing suicide. So you can write so many points here. Lots of points can be written here. Then how has it impacted Indian society? Let us see. Same. The way it has affected global society, it has impacted the Indian society similarly. Again, in Indian society, there are crypto influencers who have power to manipulate the crypto coins. Now, these crypto influencers are a closed groups. They create in society what is known as closed groups. Then the government is not able to have control over the cryptocurrency. Government doesn't know how to have control over cryptocurrencies. Then the very nature of cryptocurrencies is they are highly volatile, and because of FOMO, people keep investing in cryptocurrencies, which ultimately results in loss and people committing suicide. Recently in Andhra Pradesh, there were cases of multiple suicides in Andhra Pradesh because of loss in cryptocurrency markets. Then cryptocurrencies in India have created a group of millennial entrepreneurs and millionaires. Is it okay? And they invest their money earned through cryptocurrency in what is known as Veblen goods or luxury goods. So it has created a great market for luxury goods in India. And of course, there is problem of increase in cyber crimes related to cryptocurrencies. So quite simple question again. Global society, positive, negative. Indian society, some 4-5 points you can write. So this is about your answer number 19. And we move to the last question of Indian society, question 20. See the question number 20. How does Indian society maintain continuity in traditional social values enumerate the changes taking place in it. Very simple. Let us see question number 20 now. So, intro, body and conclusion. What will you write in intro? You will write that Indian society is unique in itself, because Indian society has maintained what is known as continuity from the past till the present. Continuity from the past till the present in our customs and traditions, which is unlike other civilizations like Mesopotamian, Greek, Roman civilizations, which have lost continuity from the past till the present. So India is a unique case which has been able to maintain its continuity from the past till the present. Now in the body we will write why. What is the reason that India has been able to maintain continuity from the past till the present? So I will give you 6 keywords here which you can elaborate. That Indian culture is very assimilative in nature, is very assimilative. In the past also, it has led to many Indianization of foreigners. Then Indian society is highly tolerant from very beginning, because it has allowed the birth of multiple sects, cults and different religious groups. So it has remained tolerant. Then Indian society has a unique feature. It has self-sufficient autonomous villages. And you know, whenever there is a contact with the outside world, the culture is not able to reach these self-sufficient autonomous villages. So these self-sufficient autonomous villages maintain continuity from the past traditions. Then diversity is so huge. The Indian diversity is so high that it is very difficult, you know, for outside forces to touch all aspects of Indian diversity. Then the Indian culture is flexible also. The Indian culture is flexible to change. So if when it comes in contact with outside world, it changes according to its own customs. For example, you know, these days matrimonial alliances are happening on internet, but they happen according to the caste preferences. So when you create your profile on shadi.com, the first thing you have to do is you have to choose your caste. So flexibility means customs mold themselves according to the modernity. That is what we want to say here. And the last is, the most important is the Indian model of secularism. The Indian model of secularism, which makes, you know, the Indian model of secularism, which makes it very, Indian model of secularism, which talks about unity in diversity. Unity in diversity. And because of unity in diversity, the state promotes the diverse customs and traditions of India. It is the duty of the state to promote diverse customs and traditions of India. So these are 6 main keywords which you can use in your answer to say that why India is able to maintain continuity. Diversity point you can write, it is very difficult to homogenize the Indian society. So this we can write here. Now in conclusion, what we can say here, what are the recent changes happening in the traditional values? What changes have been happening in the traditional values? Yes, basically we have to write changes taking place in traditional social values. So what are the changes taking place in case of marriage? There is an increase in age of marriage. There are growing incidences of intercaste marriages. Yes. Then in the case of family system, there is increased nuclearization of families happening in India. Increased nuclearization of families. Then family system is now been replaced by live-in relationships. Then there is decline in the importance given to customary laws. Then there is growing level of intolerance in society. Intolerance you might have seen recently. You can write the case of hate speech and mob lynching cases. So these are some of the changes which have been happening in the society in the present times. So less impact is placed on Indian model of secularism. The right-wing oriented political parties wants to move towards homogenization and follow the idea of majoritarianism. So this you can write what changes are happening. Changes in marriage, point number 1. Changes in family, point number 2. Declining importance of customary laws, 3. How we can justify declining importance of customary laws? The state wants to bring uniform civil code. Then 4th, growing intolerance, rise in hate speeches and increase incidences of mob lynching. So this all you can write in conclusion, that Indian society is going through all these changes. But you also have to write why these changes are coming in Indian society. What is the reason? Because of globalization leading to increased consumerism. So that is why the Indian society is changing. Impact of globalization, technology leading to increased consumerism. Is it okay? So this question was also very easy, very easy, and you can write these points here. So that's all about your Indian society discussion. Thank you.